It's February and we celebrate Black History Month. And in order to recognize that, we wanted to interview Deacon Allen Greene, who is deacon of our pastorate here at Resurrection and St. Paul. And we're very excited to have him here to share a little bit about his story, his history. Deacon Allen, I have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
Would you be willing to answer them?
Absolutely, Kate.
Great. What feelings do you have as you look back at your past here in this church and the church?
Well, I tell you, I have a lot of fond memories. Just being here brings great joy to me, given my life's journey. This is our home church. I was baptized here some 67 years ago. Back then, we still lived in a very segregated community, even here in the church. Me, my relatives, the African American community sat behind me. And so for many years growing up, I only seen the altar from the side. And that produced a slight sense of inferiority because for many years, that's where the African American community sat and observed Mass. And it wasn't until my grandfather's funeral Mass in 1991. Now, I traveled all over, so, things became more integrated, much earlier than that. But for me, coming back and going to Mass for my grandfather's funeral Mass in 1991 was the first time, literally, I had seen the front of the altar. And there was still this sense in this church. Thanks for clarifying that. And there was this slight sense of feeling that I was out of place. A slight sense of inferiority. Those many years later, I still had that sense for. But I'm much further along and past that quite a bit. In fact, this past October, from that pulpit right there, I gave a homily on servitude, serving others, one of the chapters in Mark. So, like any challenge we face in life growing up, if you really focus on it, you have faith. And for me, my faith was grounded in the Catholic Church. We persevered as a family, and to this day, I get great joy being here. I love this church.
Our second question is, can you tell me a little bit about your faith journey as an African American Catholic?
Well, my journey in the faith, I really have to look back at my ancestors. As best as we can tell, we were baptized into the faith around 1793. That's the earliest records we have. At the Dorringen Manor by the Carroll family. And from that time, I represent the seventh generation of African American Catholics within Howard County. And I hope soon we'll have a ninth generation with the baptism of my little grandson in the coming months. But my journey continues. It's a journey that has been passed along from my grandfather, who was a pillar here in the church as a sacristan for many years. He went to Mass here every morning, said his rosaries every day. And that Catholic tradition was instilled in each of us as we grew up. Me and my family, my sisters, my parents, my mother was raised in the Catholic Church. Her and her sisters were baptized also here at St. Paul's. And so as we traveled, my mother, her father, and family around the world as part of a military family, the Catholic Church was my foundation. It was something that I drew a sense of kinship amongst myself and my fellow Catholics as we traveled to places like Japan, the Philippines, Taiwan, down to Texas, up to New York. I was almost always the only person of color, the only African American. But where I drew my sense of community amongst my fellow Americans was through the Catholic Church. We shared that sense of shared identity as we went to church together, received communion together. I was a altar boy for many years growing up, and so the church was always right there with me, and it's been, as you can see, a very key part of my life's journey to this day. And the universal nature of the church ensured that regardless of where I was in the world, in the Middle East, there was a Catholic service that I could attend. May not understood the language, but certainly, you know, the rubrics, the ritual of Mass was very common.
That's really so neat.
Yeah. A phenomenal experience.
Who or whom were your greatest influences in your life?
Well, of course, the church continues to influence my life. But I must say my grandfather, who raised his family in the church, and he was a pillar here at St. Paul's. He was a sacristan for many years, went to morning mass every single day of his life here at St. Paul's. He raised his family in the church. All of his daughters went to St. Paul's school, and my mother, his eldest daughter, went to St. Paul's colored school. So he was a strong man of faith, and he instilled that faith in all of us. A man who, through the 40s and 50s, and he served in World War II in Germany, but going through what he experienced as a young man, raising a family of 5 daughters in the county, it's obvious. And even when I got to know him as an adult, the church was a very, very strong foundation for him. And he instilled it in all of us, and it continues to be a foundation passed on from him to me to this day. He, as I had said earlier, was here as a sacristan, went to church every morning, said his rosaries every day. He was such a man of faith. And just to witness his life and how he lived his life and conducted himself throughout the community left a profound influence on me and the rest of my family. So I must say that my grandfather was a key influencer, and it just reminds me, and it should remind all of us, the influence, a profound influence we can have on someone's life, just to observe how we conduct ourselves and how we live our lives. You just don't know, what impact you could be having on your kids or your community at large. So that's who I'd say my grandfather.
Thank you. Wow. What has your life been like as a deacon?
It's been very, very fulfilling. It has brought me a lot of joy, and I must thank Deacon George Krause for asking me to join him here in the parish. I was in Glen Burnie right after I was ordained for the first 7 years of being a deacon. And George had asked that I consider moving and being a part of this pastorate. And it's been a great joy. I still miss the folks of Glen Burnie, great community, but I equally enjoy the time I've spent thus far here within the pastorate. Enjoy baptizing, young folks into the church, babies and little toddlers. About 18 months or so ago, I baptized my first child here within St. Paul's, and it continues to be very, very special for me to baptize someone into the church, given my history here at St. Paul's. Witnessing marriages is just, a great joy and a great honor. And being able to proclaim the gospel and preach here is also very special. But the thing that I get, I guess, the greatest joy out of is to be able to touch someone's life and really being there for those in need. And you don't have to be a member of the clergy to do that. We're all empowered to touch someone's life and be there for them. And I remember a quote, I shared this in a homily from Mother Teresa, that not all of us might not have the opportunity to do great things, but all of us have the opportunity to do small things with great love.
What do you see as a challenge within the African American community and the Catholic Church? How can we, as a community, work together to overcome this challenge?
Boy, that's a great question, Kate. When I look at some of the recent statistics from USCCB, I believe it showed there were 3 million U.S. African American Catholics. Of that, about 250 African American priests, 430 some odd deacons, about 400 religious sisters, and about 50 religious brothers. When you just look at priests alone, the number of priests, just, African American priests out of that 3 million community, that's like 0.01%. I think that the church needs to do more to provide outreach to the African American community. There's like 700 African American parishes, predominantly African American parishes within the U.S. I just think we need to get more people engaged in serving the church, whether that be lay individuals or clergy, religious. I just think that we should do more as a church. And I think also the African American community, those that have a sense of calling should reach out to their local priest or to the office of vocation within the archdiocese. So I think there's work to be done on both sides. And I certainly would encourage all African Americans, whether they're in predominantly white parishes or African American black parishes, to get involved, to really be a representative of Christ within their church, to really set a model of discipleship to those amongst them, whether they be young or their fellow adults. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I don't want to suggest that it's just within the African American community. When you look at those same statistics, there are like 37,000 priests amongst a Catholic population of about 70 million. I might be a little off on those numbers.
We won't be a fact checker.
But when you look at priests, that represents a community of 0.05%. So a little better, but I think there's just a lot more work to be done in that area.
I definitely think that we as a church need to do a better job about vocations.
Yes. Totally.
Good marriages, good clergy, and good single people.
Totally agree. And the church is just such a powerful voice, such a strong presence within the community, and we all should take some accountability, and we all should get engaged. So, although I can, witness a marriage or proclaim the gospel, the greatest joy I get is really making a difference in someone's life, and that we're all empowered to do.
Thank you. What do you see in your future?
Gosh, another good question. Well, I do expect to spend more time sharing my life story, my life's journey. I'm reminded of a talk that I had given to some young corporate managers a number of years ago, entitled "You Can't Take It With You." I thought of the title from an experience I had at one of the local Verizon stores, where I went in to, I think I was getting a phone repaired at the time, and the young fella had looked up my corporate account, had noticed that I was a corporate VP, and he looked up at me and he says, "So, what's your secret?" This is a young African American gentleman, and at the time I wanted to get my phone fixed and out of there, and he was probably sensing that with the body language. And then he looked at me and he said, "Hey man, you can't take it with you." And I was kind of pushed back and struck by that. And ever since then, and we had a beautiful conversation, and ever since then, I do feel, a sense of a calling to share my life's experience. And we all have our experiences, and I think, whether you're a youngster and you've been bullied or teased and you've overcome that, whether you're dealing with financial issues, cultural issues, I think that with faith, determination, and having faith that there's a better tomorrow, and pursuing overcoming those challenges is a story that you should share to others. You just never know whose life you can make a difference in, and that is something I'd like to do more of, and I do feel a calling to do that. I'm reminded of a quote that came from Stuart Scott, who was an African-American broadcaster who was battling cancer and had since passed away. He said, "When you die, it does not mean that you lose to cancer. You beat cancer by how you live your life. why you live, and in the manner in which you live. You know, you beat cancer by putting one foot forward and really not giving up and just persevering through those challenges. And we all, you know, deal with challenges, and, you know, there's any number of things we all can face. But with faith and determination and just pressing ahead, we can certainly overcome those challenges. And one of the things that my grandfather would always tell me is to be kind. You know? Maya Angelou said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel."